So today I'm talking with Daniel Quinn about how he's using or how he's using Navexa to manage his SMSF and family portfolios. And I thought it'd be a good opportunity to see what the journey looks like from before using Navexa all the way through to what it looks like now and how it's kind of helped you. So let's start at the beginning with what was the original problem that you had that kind of prompted you to go and look for a solution?
That's a really interesting question. Have to start back with building a self-managed super fund in the first place and the compliance around managing it. And that stems back to the investment strategy, which you need to have for a self-managed super fund. And as part of that investment strategy, you need to be able to review your portfolio. And in particular with mine, you need to be able to keep an eye on the weighting between the various asset allocations and the assets between defensive and high growth slash volatile portfolio parts. So the primary tool I was after was an easy thing to both enter all that data into, but then monitor on an ongoing basis to go, okay, on any given day, my defensive allocation has fallen to 14%. I need to start paying attention to that because that's falling below the band of what my investment strategy says. So that was the primary tool I was after.
Right. What are the consequences of if you didn't track and you did breach some of those bans?
If it gets picked up in an audit, you can get flagged by the ATO to go and have a look at that. I mean, the biggest consequence is you'll get told to wind your self-managed super fund up, basically, if you start not complying. So
Right.
yeah, there's some serious consequences to it. Yeah.
And so what kind of things had you been trying to get on top of that? Had you been doing your SMSF long before you looked for something like this?
No, funnily enough, the self-managed super fund's less than 2 years old, and I started looking straight away because I'm quite conservative in risk management. So if I see a risk somewhere in the future, I'll start looking for the tool now to start trying to deal with it. So I started looking pretty much straight away. When I first was researching what I was going to invest with I
Yeah.
started looking for a tool then straight away. Yeah.
And so was spreadsheets, I'm assuming spreadsheets was a potential solution you looked at?
Spreadsheets were a potential solution. I don't like spreadsheets. I'm not very good at them. So they were a solution I glanced at and went, that is not the solution for me.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's some fantastic examples of spreadsheets taking down listed companies and things. So it's
I look at some of the examples that people have on the various groups I'm in, some with envy, some with like that. I don't even want to know how many hours that took out of your life. I'm not,
that's
not for me.
one decimal point out of place or one formula incorrect,
Just
and
no,
you end up
no.
winding up in super fund.
Life's too busy.
That's right. And so what other things have you tried? Or
I tried ShareSite
yeah,
and I tried Navexa. So I have recently also had a play with Snowball. I have some insight into that. ShareSite. So if I go back a few steps, ShareSite came onto my horizon before Navexa as part of a Morningstar subscription that I tried. It was included. So I went with Morningstar for 12 months just to give it a go because it was 100% super then. The super fund was able to pay for it. Had to play with ShareSite. It had a few things that just didn't work for me and my workflow. And then I started researching alternatives, and Navexa came up as one of those alternatives. And then I went and had a play with Navexa, and I went, okay, well, ShareSite, I'm sorry, you're gone. Navexa is the tool that I'm going with moving forward.
that's what I like to hear.
Mm,
So so you're saying that even though you got ShareSite for free essentially with another subscription, that
yeah,
you preferred to use Navexa.
yeah, yeah. So not only did I get ShareSite for nothing, and Navexa cost me money, I still stuck with Navexa.
Very good.
Yeah.
So what's your experience been with Navexa so far?
My experience with Navexa has been fantastic. So I mean, its closest competitor that I've played with is ShareSite. So there's a few big fundamental differences between the two. The first one, Navexa is just far easier to enter data in. Like it's hard to describe why, but it is just so much easier to put data in. The integrations have grown more and more and more advanced. So I don't use much of the integrations, but I'm aware of how much better they are. Last but not least, yourself and your team, when some issues have arisen, and they haven't really been issues, they've just been, I don't know how to do this.
Yeah.
Your team is just amazingly responsive. Like, so if I need something or I want something fixed or I've got a suggestion that I put on the table, like that month thing that you fixed within like a few days, that I find really, really important to me. If I need something, I get a response in a timely fashion and that I feel listened to by the team that I know is behind it.
Yeah. No, that's really good to hear, and that's kind of one of the big areas we push in, which is why I still do a lot of the support myself, because
Mm,
I believe that a lot of other businesses just outsource that part and don't really care about it. But
yeah,
I would have never even met you in the first place if I wasn't on the support listening to
yeah,
customers like yourself and what you were looking for.
yeah.
So that's really good to hear that's a big part of it. So so now you've used Navexa for quite a while. What's kind of the top benefit you're getting out of it, other than just kind of like having a handle on your SMSF? Is there a particular aspect of it that you find critical?
Uh, that is the critical for me. I don't use it for my tax purposes. I could, but because I have a good SMSF accountant, they prefer to do all of that side of it themselves anyway. So I can use Navexa's tax reporting tools to get an idea of my profit and loss. So I can get a net idea of what it's done over the course of 12 months, but I still pass all of the statements and everything over to the account. So that's their job. Each critical tool for me for the SMSF is tracking the investments. That's pretty much 90% of my use of the product. And it's
Yeah.
amazing for that. It's really good. Like I can look at it over any time period. I can look at it, all the weightings, which is really important to me. Like it's good.
Yeah, definitely. And I know as myself as an individual investor, being able to see the performance breakdown across dividends and things like that, it's been super
You
critical.
know, everyone tracks growth. So many people forget to go and track overall return
Yeah.
because, as an example, two of the managed funds that I track in the Vector, if you just looked at the capital growth, particularly if you went from the 30th of June to the 1st of July, you'd be going, what, why are you investing in that? But then you add all the returns on top, total return, and then I can go look at it minus the tax on top of that and go, okay, well, there's my net return for the year. Cool. I just beat Australian Super by 2%,
Yeah. And
which I did, by the way.
that's really good. If you're going to run an SMSF, I guess that's a very good benchmark to be trying to beat.
Pretty much, yeah.
And similarly with, how do you find the benchmarking? Is that something that you look at often or not something you're that interested in?
So that is the one thing I do find a little bit frustrating.
Yeah.
I can't, and part of it is trying to benchmark against a super fund, like an industry super fund or an APRA super fund in the first place, is ridiculously hard because they self-report their benchmarks, which is fine. There's a lot of unlisted capital in their returns. So if you look at their commercial property exposure, for example, they don't need to revalue that on a year by year basis if they don't feel like it. So a self-managed super fund does. So I actually track mine against, um, now what do I track it against? Vanguard's all-inclusive high growth ETF. So it's not a true benchmark because it's got not much defensive in it whatsoever. Whereas obviously the self-managed super fund at the moment is about 15% defensive. So I basically track it against that. And if it's more or less sort of going up in the same or down in the same and there's no massive variation against it, then that works well for me. What would be really cool, and I think we have discussed this, is if I could do something silly like um, join the ASX 200 and the S&P 500 together and benchmarks
Right, like
that
a
as a
blended
crazy
benchmark.
example, like some really custom benchmark, which would be ridiculously hard to implement, so I've never asked for it. So yeah,
No, I
I
like
just
that.
track it.
That
I
sounds
track it
actually.
against an all-inclusive ETF, and as long as it's sort of within that, I go, yeah, okay, I'm okay.
So do you think, not to get too off topic here, but is that a bit of a defense mechanism from the super funds part where they don't have to value some of these things?
Yeah, of course
Because
it is.
as
Absolutely.
most Australians are obsessed with property, you'd think that you'd want a property valuation pretty regularly.
Sometimes I think they do it. Some, I don't think Australian Super does this. They're actually not too bad. Some of the other super funds I know outright, like, because obviously over COVID there was a massive hit to commercial property, like B and C rated property went down the toilet, and they didn't value a lot of that stuff for a number of years.
Yeah,
And you know full well that it's dropped. Well, occupancy went down to 10, 20%.
yeah,
Thinking B and C rated properties is still not that great. Um, it's getting better now because all the big corporates are going no longer working from home, thanks.
yeah,
But
yeah.
some of it still hasn't been revalued.
Mm, very
Yeah,
interesting. A combo for another time. Um, Tell me about. I know you had some issues with tracking DRP in the past, and
yep,
that's something that Navex has helped you with. Do you talk a bit about your experience with that?
yeah. So uh, you either love or hate DRP. So a lot of people won't touch DRP because it complicates your portfolio because obviously every quarter or 6 months, depending on the ETF, you are effectively buying one or two units. So if you looked at my history over the 2 years of holding VAS, for example, there's multiple purchases of very small amounts of shares. Now, I really like DRP because I don't have to go and take the income, respend it, take the income, respend it. I like it sitting there. The problem with DRP eventually, it's not a problem for today, but eventually when I go and sell those shares, you then have to go work out the cost basis of, the original purchase of 300 shares, whatever it was, and then those two shares and those two shares and those two shares and those two shares. I have been looking at the tax reporting tools of Navexa in the last 6 months or so. It's not something I really touched because I haven't sold anything. But more of okay, somewhere in the future, this is going to bite me. What do they look like? Do I need to go and turn DRP off so that that's not going to be an issue in hopefully 15 years when I retire? And I'm really, really comfortable with how Navex is tracking that because I've played with those tools now to go, no, I'm just going to leave DRP on because it's just easier for me. Because now I know that the tax reporting at the end, I'm not going to have a problem with it. It's fine. It's good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think I've spoken to a lot of investors who think about that as well, who can get quite put off by DRP because of the administration. And fortunately, if you use Navexa, that problem kind of goes away because in a few
Mm,
years, when you go to sell, there's nothing you need to do. You just run the report. It's all
yeah.
sorted. But I've described it as it's kind of like the hidden problem that's just building up behind the scenes because people are so unaware of the flexibility you have with calculating capital gains tax that they don't realize that all those DRPs, and it's the same with dollar cost averaging as well, all of those parcels that you get each month or whatever the period is, are building up a cost base. And when you go to sell, if you use FIFO versus LIFO or min gain, it's a hugely different tax outcome
It's
than
massive.
what people think. And so, like, I would hate to think if you'd been dollar cost averaging or DRPing for kind of a decade or two, and then you went to do some sells, like how you would possibly figure out how much tax you're supposed to pay.
It's
That
funny,
would be a nightmare.
when you buy them for the first time, and I started investing in my daughter's name 15 years ago. They don't warn you about any of that sort of stuff. It's basically a one-liner saying, make sure you keep your records. I'm like, okay, sure, I'll keep my records.
Yeah,
And then having just gone back and put the last 15 years worth of data into Navexa. For anyone watching this, keep your records.
And that's the problem, isn't it? Because I know that, and this has been quite recent, the last 5, 10 years, the ETF boom, and it's touted
I've
as like,
exploded.
oh, it's so easy. You buy in, you get instant diversification, all that good stuff. And I'm not here to tell you whether you should or should not get into that. But yeah, the part no one speaks about is ETFs have a way bigger administrative burden than just
Yep,
buying an ordinary company, which
they really do.
you could buy one parcel, do nothing for 20 years and sell it, and it's pretty easy to
Yep.
figure out. But with the ETFs and their AMIT statements every year and the adjustments, that can cause a big problem. So maybe that's a good thing to talk about as well as with the AMIT cost-based stuff. I know we spoke about this recently.
Mm.
You've been buying into it for 15 years before you realized about it. Could you
Yep.
just speak a little bit about your experience on that?
So I had no idea about the AMIT stuff. And then a bloke and I were exchanging messages on a few Facebook forum groups that I'm a member of. And I went back, then you did the video on AMIT tax stuff, which is a fantastic video. I went back through, what are we, 2024, so the last 5 years of statements. I'm going to put that AMIT data in. I haven't done it yet. I am about to go and put all that data in. I went back and put 15, 13, and 11 years worth of investments and DRP into Navexa, which was hard work, but not because of the Navexa. It's just that's a lot of admin. And I'm not going to go any further back than 5 years. The primary reason is I don't have the AMIT statements from more than 5, 6 years ago because ComputerShare doesn't keep them.
Mm.
So unless I find the paper copy somewhere, which I don't, so that's as long as I'm going to be able to go. While I know that's going to have some material impact on capital gains tax, I know from some discussions we've been having that will be in the ATO's favour, not mine. So it doesn't. It is what it is. It's a lesson. And yeah, I'll be going and entering that data into a tool which at least makes entering that data easy.
Yeah. And as we've been chatting, like it's so common for ETF investors to not even know
No
anything
idea.
about that. Like the statement
No idea.
arrives as an investor myself, I used to get, you know, contract notes and all of that stuff arrives in the mail, and you're like, what the hell is this? And throw it in a drawer. I think people are the same with those AMIT statements. They're like, oh yeah, it's just some informational statement they're sending me. I don't need to do anything about it.
Yeah. Here's the tax statement. Here, accountant, have the tax statement. My accountant had no idea about the AMIT stuff.
Yeah,
Went on. So if I sold stuff this year, I'd be probably worse off because I hadn't supplied or entered the AMIT stuff. Obviously now I will be better off because I'll be putting it into a tool that calculates it all. So I win.
yeah, definitely. And it just keeps you out of trouble with the ATO, which no one wants to get into.
No one wants trouble with them. It's funny going back to the ETF admin compliance. You are right. ETFs are a far easier way to invest in the get-go.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, the admin side tax time is far more complicated.
Yeah, no, I feel it gets compounded because the latest wave of investors, it's all about buying ETFs, but as well as doing dollar cost averaging. So it's not like people buy one parcel of an ETF and sit on it for the next 20 years. They're buying a parcel every month or
Yeah,
every time they
people
get
are
paid.
and people are starting to trade ETFs. It's like
Yeah.
that just boggles my brain, but sure. Yeah,
It's, so it's like a, yeah, extra fun for those people. So I'm
I
hopefully
know
we can spread the word.
I know people that are DCAing and buying because obviously once you buy one parcel of 500, 600 bucks, if you're going down the traditional chess path, and all mine are chess, then you can go and buy two or three and add onto that every fortnight or every month if you really want to and are silly enough to do so. Yeah, I far prefer saving up bigger parcels and just going buying, every I have a my investment I don't buy fortnightly, monthly. I have a trigger. So basically, when the girl's cash account hits 800,
Yeah.
I go buy more, and then I've alternated between ASX, S&P 500, and then I just keep an eye on it. And then I'm trying to keep that at about 50-50. So again, I can quickly glance at Navexa and go, okay, I'm underweight ASX this X time that I've got that amount of money. I'm buying S&P 500 this time, so on
Yeah.
and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. So I'd like to get a bit deeper into the conversation about what was the reason you wanted to start investing in the first place?
Oh, that's a good question, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, I'm going to split that in two. 20 something years ago, uh, the Works Default Fund, can I mention brands?
Yeah.
Anyway, they're a bank MLC. So they were you know, they're not an industry fund, but the MLC was the fund. And we had a super fund person come into the building one day and have a chat. And they were talking about their fee base and where the fees became thing. That's right. It was before you could choose your own super fund. And then that
Right.
changed within my employment history. I can't remember what year that was. I think it was early 2000s. I'd have to go look at it. Anyway, so you can choose your own super fund now. I'm like, okay, cool. That's interesting. And I sort of, Pop was quite an astute investor. So I sort of had a bit of an inkling from when I visited my grandfather all the time, and they were very careful with money. And okay, I'll go start looking at better super funds. Let's just go see the difference, right? That was when I moved to Australian Super because their fees were literally half of MLC.
Wow.
And I think CanStar was still doing the Apple check back there, or there's some sort of comparison. And I looked at it I was in the early 20s by this stage. And I went, oh, okay, when I retire, I'll be like 90, 100 grand better off if I go to Australian Super and not MLC. It's a bit of a no-brainer. Fast forward a little bit, I had a chat with an Australian Super advisor who basically went, you need to go to high growth in your super because you've got all these years to the future and you need to do that. And with having no idea what I was doing whatsoever, I went to high growth, which, as it turns out, was the right decision. 16 years ago, my wife brought home a book called How to Give Your Kids $1 Million.
Right.
And the whole premise of that book was $1 a day or $20 a fortnight inflation. Put it into low cost ETFs to start and then start investigating LICs or properties or any of that sort of stuff once you get to a certain value. But even if you just stuck with ETFs and Australian shares and just kept going with $20 a day until you get to 55 or so, their portfolio will be worth $1 million. That
Right.
was the premise behind it. Right? And the whole idea was that you spent that time bringing that mindset into your daughters' heads or kids' heads to
Mm.
go, if you just start here and put away bugger all, like even if you start at 5%, right, and just keep building that at 55, you'll be far more financially better off than I will be.
Yeah.
Certainly more financially better off than my parents are, just by making small habitual things from the second you start earning money. So my kids had tax file numbers before they were 1 years old. And so I started investing in their names. And then I go, oh, okay, well, if I'm investing in their names, I should probably go invest in our own names as well. And then I had a few forays into individual stocks. One, ResMed did extraordinarily well. Two, did not do so extraordinarily well. And then I just started doing, their core investment was SPDR's STW ASX 200, which is the only real ASX listed ETF 15 years ago. There's heaps now. ETFs have exploded, but that was the core one
Yeah.
available at the time. And I just kept piling it in, piling it in. Every time it hit $600, $700, buy more, buy more, buy more. Now I've started diversifying into S&P 500 for them, sort of a home bias, unfortunately. And then COVID hit, so that destroyed everything. Not the kids. We kept the kids' investing going. Had to liquidate ours because I went to 40% of my income over
Right.
COVID. So that was just life. And we've started rebuilding that portfolio. But over that time, I started looking more and more at what my super was doing. And then, you know, follow a whole bunch of finance forums. I get spam all the time. I get cold calls all the time. Like, I'm just not interested. But I got a call from a mob in Melbourne, who, by the way, have now been ASIC stopped. But anyway, who offered a wholesale investment option. Now, it was very attractive. It stacked up. So they created the self-managed super fund just before they were able to invest into their wholesale fund. They got ASIC stopped for offering wholesale funds to a retail investor. Now, at the time, I had no idea about the difference between a retail and a wholesale investor. I now know those two differences. So they got ASIC stopped. And then so the money all got parked in a cash account for while I went and made a decision as to whether I kept the self-managed super fund, because it was a legit self-managed super fund. They got that bit right. It was all there. Or I pile it back into a industry fund and go, okay, yeah, don't worry about it. So I sat there for 3 months while I worked out exactly what I was going to do. And then I went, okay, I think I can do at least as good as the super fund,
Hmm.
if not better, and have a whole deal of fun. Not playing is the wrong word, because I certainly don't go play with my money, but
Yeah.
I think I can do as equal, and I really, really enjoy that process and how it all works. So I kept the self-managed super fund, and you know, it's just invested in a bunch of ETFs, a couple of managed funds, bit of cash, not much cash. It's about a 85-15 fund at the moment. Well, 4% of it's gold. So I've had some great, wouldn't call them arguments, robust conversations about whether gold's defensive or volatile.
Yeah. I
And
think
yeah,
I
just
saw one of those on
I
the
love
Race
it.
forum.
Yeah, that was one of them. Yeah. So yeah, and a lot of pundits are going, you could do what you've done there inside a good super fund. But
Hmm.
even in the last, only in the last sort of like, I call it 5 years, have really the customizable investments start appearing in the super funds.
Yeah.
And I think it is actually as a result of people going, you're not letting me do what I want with my money. I'm going to make a self-managed super fund. So all of a sudden, the super funds are now all reacting and going, okay, we've got this member direct thing, and we got this thing, and we got that thing. And I'm like, well, that's all very well and good, but it's still not exactly what I want. So I'm just going to go over here and do it. And it's at a balance now where that works. Sub 200 self-managed super fund probably still doesn't work, but post 400, which I'm fortunate with, I'm up at that level. The fee basis starts becoming nearly the same, and then you just get a lot more flexibility. As I said, I haven't train wrecked it. I've had all my mapping and all my modelling checked with a financial planner late last year, and it's all on the right track. So I
Yeah.
love it. I spend countless hours a week listening to podcasts, playing on finance forums, playing on Rask, looking at Navexa. Pretty much, I mean, I open Navexa every single day. I look at it every single day. I go, oh, yeah, that's a pretty blue line. That's a pretty green line. I don't make any changes. Like, I think the first substantial change I have made since I made it, I noticed the defensive allocation dropping below, getting a bit towards the 14%.
Hmm.
And I was like, yeah, I'm going to do something about that. So I cashed out some of the managed fund. And I'm going to, yeah, just bring the defensive buffer back up to about 16%.
Nice. So
So,
what was interesting what you said there? So you originally started investing for your children and
yep,
then started investing for yourself. Because
yep,
I mean, I assume it's obvious, but usually it's the other way around where
very,
people are
yeah,
investing and then they have kids, which is kind of my situation of got three boys now over the last 4 years. So now I've switched from, when I started investing, I think I was really early 20s. So it was all about,
yeah,
oh,
right.
yeah, got to make a lot of money and get rich kind of thing.
Yep,
And then once you start having children, it's like the mindset shifts and it's like, how can I like set up the family for decades to come? Is
yep,
that is that kind of the reason you would say that you started investing for the kids was to kind of just set up their
absolutely.
financial future?
Yeah. So my grandparents, as I said, were fairly financially good. My mother-in-law, funnily enough, is extraordinarily financially savvy, and she likes property, so she's gone down the property path, and for a whole bunch of reasons I never will, but she's done quite well in that. My parents are not. So they, for all sorts of reasons, they're not as financially well off as I would have hoped they would be. And I'm not as financially well off. Like if I knew now if I knew in my early 20s what I now know now, I would be in a much better financial position and heading to retire. Retirement's only 15 years away for me, hopefully. And my retirement is going to be much better than it could have been or would have been if I didn't start thinking about this stuff, 5, 6 years ago where I started really thinking about retirement, like salary sacrifice now, and I'm on the right path. I want my kids to be one step even better than that because I
Yeah,
really do believe the financial goalposts, the government's going to move them again. They're going to keep tweaking all the
absolutely.
things. All that stuff's going to. I really wanted them to be in a much better financial position, but not only. I don't want them to just get to 55 and go, oh, cool, I've got an investment account of $1 million because of Dad started this and I've just kept going with it.
Yeah,
I want them to form the habits in their early 20s of always not spending to the line, like always having 5% there, having an emergency fund, having, the flexibility when they get older to maybe not work as hard or follow something they really want to do or just something, leave something that's better than what position I am at the same age, if that makes sense.
yeah, definitely. And I think is would you say like money is a topic that you discuss with your children and your immediate
Every day
family?
of the week,
Yeah,
always.
that's
My
awesome.
kids know what our household budget is. I had it open this morning. Abby and I were looking at it. They
That's
know full well, like and it's always been age appropriate. So, like a 15-year-old, I can't go, all right, you're spending $100 a fortnight. That's $2,600 by the time we get to the end of the year. What are you going to give up for that? So when they were 3, you can't have that conversation. But it
yeah,
was more of, okay, we can go and do this thing, but as a consequence of doing that thing, we're gonna probably not going to be able to do this thing, you know. And
right.
as they get older and learn enough maths to be able to have the conversation where you start using real figures, you're able to go, all right, let's go out for dinner. As a family unit, dinner costs $180 now.
Yeah,
For $180, right? Yeah, sorry, it does. For $180, we could go and do this. You know, that's one night of accommodation if we go somewhere in the end of December if we want to. Like we can start. We've always had those conversations, and they didn't exist when I was a kid. Like money was tight. I knew it was tight, but it was never. We never talked about money, and I think a lot of Western society money is a taboo topic. Like there's not, I have a very small circle of people I can talk about money and investing with.
yeah,
And in that circle, there's not many that I would disclose exactly how big my super fund is because, I'm privileged to have been paying super since I was 18. I'm privileged to have been able to salary sacrifice. I'm privileged to the early 20s to put it on high growth. Like all of those sort of things have worked in my favor. But I don't, financial education needs to be taught at school as far as I'm concerned.
yeah,
They're taught career advisement, they're talked a little bit about paying tax, whatever, but they're not taught, okay, only spend 95% of your income. You get used to the entire life of only spending 95% of what you earn, and you do something sensible with that 5% left over, and it earns on average, 5 to 8% post inflation until you're in your 50s. Perfect. Like home and hosed, right? But we don't get
yeah.
taught that. And households don't talk about money. But no, we talk about money. We absolutely talk about money. My kids know exactly what we spend on what.
That's really cool because growing up, my family did talk about money. So, like my mum was, she would run her own businesses and we'd know how much was owing on the mortgage of the house and all sorts of things like
Yeah,
that. And so, growing up, I came out of school knowing that I can go to uni and get a job, but there's also this other path of running your own businesses. Here
yeah.
we are.
Here you
And
are. Yeah,
that was that was a huge thing for me. But now I've had kids, my oldest, 3 boys, and the oldest is 4. I'm starting to think about, well, what what are the right lessons to be teaching a 4 year old about money? And going forward, how can I give him the knowledge to set him up so as he gets older and or as they all get older and into the kind of
yeah.
18 into the workforce, like
Changes on the kid too. So my 15-year-old has, like my dearest wife, has no interest in money. Like just finance stuff is just like, yeah, sure, you deal with that sort of stuff. So for her, it's okay. Let's get into the habit of just putting small amounts of per fortnight of what you earn aside. That gets invested follow this path. Here's why it works. Here's why you can have a high risk tolerance to this sort of stuff. Whereas my 13-year-old is really interested. I can have an hour-long conversation with her about an ETF, and the 11-year-old, whatever, she'll be a world leader or a serial killer, maybe both. We'll park her for a while. So it's different conversations with them as well. But I just think it's so important. Like if you don't, money's such a massive part of our lives, rightly or wrongly,
Yeah, for
to,
every
to
single person.
and they're not set up for it. They stay at home or they go to school, they do all that sort of stuff, and it's like, be a good human, go get a job, pay your taxes, whatever, and that's where it stops. It never goes to, by the way, if you want a good retirement or a nice life when you're 40s and 50s, maybe you should think about getting into the habit of chunking aside some bits. And here's why it should be not left in the bank account or stuffed under a mattress. Shares aren't scary. The stock market is not a gambling house. I mean, it can be if you're silly, but if you go after solid ETF now or blue chips back then and just keep adding to it and keep it, you'll do really well. You really well. Like historically, you will do well. You know,
Yeah.
it's like super. The main reason I focus on super, um, it's still the most tax effective way to save for retirement. Well, I'm not touching that till I'm 60. Like straight up, not retiring early. 60 is the goalpost. 62 is the retirement goalpost if we match historics.
Yeah.
So super's a no-brainer. That's what I'm paying the most attention to. I have investments on the side in my wife's name because she pays less tax. But it's more of a itch scratch than anything. It's not,
Yeah.
it's not going to make me rich,
Yeah.
but it's fun, and I won't lose money. 15 years, I'll be all right.
Yeah, that's
You,
right. No, it's really interesting to hear because I would love to change the culture of Australia. I'm from New Zealand, so the culture there as well, but it's kind of very similar where people don't talk about money. And what really annoys me is that money and taxes, mortgages and credit cards, it affects every single person. Yet
yep,
in school, you're taught subjects that only matter to a few people. So
yeah,
they'll teach you maths, and some people will never use maths. Or they'll teach you
yep,
English, some people are never going to use those English skills. But then there's no education about here's how like paying rent works.
yep,
And yet everyone's going to do that at some point. Or here's how
yep.
to pay a mortgage. And
Here's
these
how to
skills,
go and have a discussion with your insurance company to go, why did you just put that up 40%? Fix it or I'm going.
that's right. So, and then we
Yeah,
then we see I mean, put your conspiracy hat theory on, and it's probably a larger thing of if everyone's financially illiterate, then there's a lot more opportunity for the smaller subset who is financially literate.
could
But
not agree more.
yeah, it just astounds me. But I know some schools are now starting to bring kind of personal finance and stuff into the curriculum, but it should be a kind of a national requirement, not an optional thing.
I think it should be. There's a really interesting book I read called Girls Who Invest, by a lady investor, and it it, it is all around, you know, back in the day, women were meant to stay at home and cook food, and the men were the financially astute one, and the investors, whatever. And it's very much, and this is what I love about ETFs, right? This is what I love about micro investing platforms, even though some, they've got high fee base and they've got issues. It's bringing that idea of investing into mainstream.
Mm.
It's no longer the stockbroker that you used to ring on the phone with the tire that used to go, oh, you got to buy this, you got to sell that. It's no longer
Yeah, the Wolf
all
of
that,
Wall Street type thing.
all right. All of that was crazy. Like what that investment, anyway, all of that noise, if we can teach our kids to go, you don't actually have to pay attention to any of that noise if you don't want to.
Mm.
You have the opportunity and the pathway to, raise was my first investment thing. I actually
Right.
started putting money into raise first. So I did all the kids stuff and got all their investments. And then I started putting money into raise. And then I looked at the fee base of, it got up to a few grand. And then I was looking at the fee basis and the underlying assets. And I went, Well, I can probably just do that better on my own and not pay your fees. Thanks. And so I did. But the micro investing platform got me introduced to different ETF options, which then led to me to explore, okay, I don't have to use Raise, I can go use Perla instead and not
Yeah,
pay those fees, you know?
yeah. And that's all part of the financial journey, isn't it? And getting more
Hmm.
financially literate on, because there's the big topics like investing in ETFs or property in general, but then there's all the nitty gritty detail of AMIT statements and fees on
Yep.
ETFs and things like that, which I think is part of the reason that scares off a lot of people.
Yeah.
But you don't need to know all of that stuff initially. You just kind of, whatever it is, whether it's creating a business or learning a skill or investing, you just need to kind of get started and you'll figure out the rest as you go.
Owen Rusk is a big supporter of that. Like, don't stop. And so's Glenn James. Like, yep, just dive in. You can learn that stuff as you go. Put some money on the table. Don't heave in at 400 grand. Like, just put some money on the table,
Yeah,
add to your position, learn about it, build a core, build a core framework around some really good index ETFs. Then learn as you go. And if you've got a long time frame, you're not going to muck it up. You're really not.
mm,
If you're trying to save for a house and you throw 100 grand and the market drops 20%, probably not a great idea. So, but yeah,
definitely.
everyone
Well,
needs
I
an
think,
investment strategy.
yeah, I think
Different topic.
it's probably a good point to wrap it up. I don't want to keep you all day, but thanks for coming
That's
on
all
and
right.
sharing all your stories and talking
Thanks for
about
having me.
Navexa. And yeah, it was a really good chat. We'll have to do it again. I'd love to do a full session on just kind of teaching kids about financial literacy. I think if there was a message I could push out into the world, that'd be a big one.
I think
On
the core takeaway or the core thing for me on my investing journey is I am going to leave my kids in a better position as they get older than I am.
yeah,
And so as my education around investing has grown, I can then start imparting that onto them and then they'll end up in a better position.
absolutely, and that's a mission I can definitely get behind as well.
Yeah, cool.
Awesome. Well, no, that was really cool, man.